Welcome. You are listening to the Still Standing podcast, hosted by Daniela Galdi, the founder of Still Standing Together, a support and empowerment organization that helps you get back on your feet. The Still Standing podcast offers you interviews, guidance, and solutions through everyday struggles and mental health improvement. Welcome, everybody, to season 2 of the Still Standing podcast. We've made it a full year since the start of our organization, Still Standing Together, and could not have done it without the support of all of our contributors and support group leaders and listeners. I am so grateful for what 2019 brought and how we've helped the communities and women who are looking to improve their mental health and find the light and hope in their darkness. You are listening to episode 17. This episode features Carlee Myers. Carlee is the owner of the Stress Less Company. She's an expert at helping professionals who feel overworked, overwhelmed, or on the verge of burnout relieve stress so that they can find more joy at work, home, and beyond. As the founder of the Stress Less Company, Carlee has helped hundreds of women and a few brave men across the country take action to reduce stress through coaching. She believes there is no one-size-fits-all when it comes to stress management. Her work has most recently been featured through media outlets such as Good Day Philadelphia, Fox 29, The Philadelphia Inquirer, Philly Mag, and Wally Magazine. Carlee has found her purpose and mission, teaching about stress management. She'll share with us some details about her life and a traumatic experience she's gone through that brought her to this place where she's able to take what she's learned through creative stress reduction to improve upon her own management of her stress, mental health, and PTSD. For those of you listening, we do want to warn you, the accounts that happened to Carlee in her childhood may be triggering to those listening that Carlee had endured to get her to the place she's in today. And she's openly sharing this to help to show the strength, the courage, and the possibilities that can grow from a awful, traumatizing, and scary situation that happened to her as a child. For those listening, we aren't able to control all of our circumstances. There are things that happen that are always out of our control, and the unimaginable can happen. But it's up to us to make sure that we take action and we explore ways that we can continue to live on in life, doing what we want, finding happiness, finding peace, and managing those things that break us down inside, debilitate us, or hinder us from taking and experiencing every wonderful moment in this life. Carlee will talk to us about what stress is, how to be aware of stress, how to manage it, handle it, and how it shows up in different ways. And I can tell you from experience, for me, stress equals feeling overwhelmed. When you just feel like you don't know where to turn and things keep piling up. And even though we are strong human beings who are able to handle what is given to us, sometimes it feels like we can't go on. And so what I want you to take and reflect on from what Carlee is sharing with you is that she tried many ways, like all of us, like myself. We've got to try many ways to help pull us out of a life we don't want to live, regardless of what circumstances or traumatic experiences are thrown our way. There is a light through the darkness. There are ways to find happiness. There are ways to continue on with life, even when it seems like the stress, the anxiety, the trauma, the memories, all of it seems to be too much. So we want you to take in what we share in this following interview so that before you get to that breaking point, we can help you to figure out what it is that you can apply to your everyday life and who it is to talk to, who to bring in on your support team so that you always feel as though you are not going at this alone. I applaud you and congratulate you all for taking this first step of starting to take action on building yourself a better life and working through the pain that you have gone through. Continue to listen after this brief message from our sponsor for my interview with Carlee Myers, a stress management mentor. Episode 17 is sponsored by Media Friendly PR. Have you ever wondered why your competition is seemingly always on TV, radio, online, or in the news? Chances are good they have a company like Media Friendly PR working with them. Media Friendly PR specializes in media placements, communications strategies, business development, and anything to do with words that involves your business growth. We have a proven track record of earning placements for our clients, which boosts their bottom lines. The company is owned and operated by Cheryl Squadrito, an esteemed media strategist with great connections. Visit mediafriendlypr.com to learn more. Mention Daniela's podcast to get a free 30-minute social media analysis. Once again, visit mediafriendlypr.com.
Hi, Carlee. Thank you so much for talking with me and talking with our listeners for this episode. And just cannot wait to get down and dirty about stress management.
Oh my goodness. Thanks so much for having me. And I love how you described it as down and dirty. I feel like that's such a good descriptor of what we're going to do today.
Oh, I'm so glad. Well, so let's give everyone an introduction because at our support group and workshop about recurring stress and tackling pressures, everybody got to know you, but I definitely want our listeners to know who you are, how you got here, and what you can do to help.
Yeah. So for the people that actually attended the workshop, they got to know me pretty well. And I do think it's really important to know my background before even going into, what is stress and what is stress management and how do you do all of that? Because I think it's important to know that it takes one to know one. Like it takes someone who's been there and done that to be able to support you. And so we're going to go really deep really quickly. So Daniela and all of the listeners at home, let's just like take a big deep breath together. Okay. So when I was 12 years old, a man was murdered in my house and my mom was shot 3 times. And I was around 12 then, and my parents had actually gotten separated for their own reasons. And my mom started dating again, and she dated one guy and she dated another guy, and she ended up dating this specific guy, and they'd been going out for, a few weeks, a month or two. And my dad, who was a former correctional officer, was basically like, ain't nobody gonna be around my kids unless I know what their story is. And so he actually ends up pulling a background check on this guy. Like, what is his record? What's his deal? And to his dismay, found that this guy actually had an extensive history of domestic violence. And so he goes back and he tells my mom, he's like, I know you didn't mean to choose this guy. Like, you had no idea, but I just want you to know, like, this guy is not safe for you to have in your life or even in our kids' lives. And so she went back to him and she ended up breaking it off. She didn't go back to him and say like, oh, I heard you had an extensive history of domestic violence. No. But what she did was she kind of went back and was like, hey, this isn't working out. And, I just got separated. I'm not even divorced yet. I'm just not. I thought I was ready for a relationship and I'm not. And a few months later, on the anniversary of their actual breakup, that ex-boyfriend, broke into my childhood home, killed her new boyfriend, and tried to kill her. My mom was literally shot point blank in the back of the head, in her L5, in her spine, and through her arm. She was not supposed to live. And I was in that house that night. Now, luckily, it was behind closed doors, but I was still there. I still heard things. I was still trying to get her out of the room, and I couldn't. And as a result, I spent 10 years of my life suffering from PTSD. So I had night terrors. I was anxious. I was stressed out. I was overwhelmed. I mean, you name it, I was really struggling with it. And I have to tell you that, going through that as a kid, luckily there were I had two kind of mainstream support systems, right? So the first thing was that as a kid in the state of Maryland, at that time, a long time ago, we actually were required as children who experienced trauma to go to see a therapist. And thank goodness, thank goodness. But actually, for one reason or another, we didn't end up, and I say we, my sister and I, didn't end up continuing on with therapy. Whether the therapist couldn't support us or my family didn't have the finances to pay for it, we didn't end up getting that support. And the other side of the spectrum was that I actually didn't get the support that I needed from, I grew up Christian, I grew up in the church, and I didn't get the support that I needed from the church. And so I felt really alone. And so I was constantly going through life struggling. And then I kept hearing the same advice over and over again. Like, oh, well, exercise really works for me, Carlee, or yoga's great. Have you tried meditating? Have you tried therapy? Have you tried this? And the reality is that I had tried everything and none of it was working. And I felt so stuck. And it was 10 years of struggle before I ended up figuring out the thing that worked for me. And that thing was creativity. And finally, my night terrors started to go away. And finally, my stress levels started to go down. And finally, I was able to just function as a normal human and find my joy. And, that for me, first of all, I spent a few years being upset, like angry. I was like, nobody's talking about this. Why aren't people talking about, other solutions to stress management? Why aren't we having this conversation? And then I realized, oh, I'm supposed to be having this conversation. I'm supposed to be talking about how there's no one size fits all when it comes to stress management, when it comes to taking care of ourselves and our mental well-being.
Carlee, I just cannot imagine what you went through. I mean, even hearing the story at the support group and workshop and then hearing it now, it's incredible what you endured. So I just want to thank you because it is something that's very hard to talk about, but I'm happy that you've gotten to a place where you can share this with others so that they know that they're not alone, which is the whole mission that we're all trying to share with people is when you can talk about what's going on in your life, there's some healing that could potentially and does potentially grow from that. So how did you begin to be able to share this?
Huh. Only after a lot of work, Daniela. For real. No, I think that when I first found this thing called creative stress reduction, which is what I teach, um, I guess I should define what that is. Creative stress reduction is an activity. It can be anything that gets us out of fight or flight and into a state of play. But when I first discovered that for myself, it was a few years of just implementing, of just healing, of just being there for myself. And then also working with 10 years later, 15 years later, working with an actual therapist to get through that, to know that, because I think a lot of times we have specific stories that we tell ourselves and we tell others, and they're often victimizing. And so when I stepped out of victim mode, well, first of all, when I was healed, like when I healed myself and I created space for that, and then I stepped out of victim mode, that was what gave me the power, the perspective, the shifts that needed to happen to be able to share this story without getting, first of all, re-triggered. And second of all, I began to notice the importance of all of it.
Can you explain what that feels like from the beginning of knowing for yourself to create that process of healing, therapy, however you needed to do it through this creative stress reduction. What did that feel like to take that initiative on your own when you weren't getting the support from others to do so?
Mm. You know, I feel like there's always the perspective of like anytime we're going through something, a lot of times we feel really alone. For me, what made me take that action was just like hitting a new like mental health rock bottom. So I ended up just really starting to explore alternative ways to reduce stress. One specific night, when, believe it or not, I had, I've now figured out what triggered it all, but I had a cup of, or a bottle of Coca Cola at dinner with my partner's parents. We went out with the in laws and did the whole thing and had a glass of Coca Cola, not thinking anything of it. I went to bed that night with my partner and he shifted in bed. And he, you know, you do one of those things where you have your knee up. It's very common to sleep that way. Well, he turns over, shifts to put his knee up so that he's comfortable, and he ends up kneeing my leg. And I had gone to the gym like the day before and did leg day, so my legs were very, very sore. And so his knee hit my leg, and it triggered me into a full blown panic attack. Like hyperventilating, crying, freaking out, literally hallucinating. Like I had never hallucinated in my entire life. And I was like, once I came out of that panic attack, that was it. I was like, this is not acceptable. Like what just happened tonight? Not acceptable at all. I have some stuff I need to work through. I got to go see a therapist. I got to go do my creative stress reduction. I got to do the work. And what I would hope is that, Daniela, that your listeners don't wait till they hit that rock bottom, but they take action sooner. As soon as you start to feel like you're alone, like you've tried everything, like that's when I would say, as soon as you start to feel that loneliness, take action. Step into creative stress reduction. Once I went through that process, once I started taking action, I felt so much more in control of my life. Even though there was hard stuff that I had to address, I felt like there's this great quote, and I cannot remember what song it is, but it's I took a DNA test, turns out I'm 100% bad witch. I'm going to edit it, bad witch even when I'm crying crazy. So I think like as soon as we get to that place, it's we acknowledge that, and then we go to the next level. Like we start to take action. And I just think like that perspective from that song is 100% what we should be embodying to like in that process. Like that's what I started to feel. I started to feel like, yeah, I might be crying crazy, like in quotes there, but I am a boss. Like I am a queen. Like I am doing this, and I feel so much better because of it.
Absolutely. That's so great because it's a great inspiring message, Carlee, that you're sending, that you can get back to who you feel you are. And I can 100% relate to that because I have let myself get to those panic attack moments. And I think we both, this is different circumstances, but the same message of like not getting there. Because when I was, 24 and I had faced anxiety, depression, I just didn't know it was that. I was coping in different ways. I was going out a lot. I was, not caring and not understanding why I was always upset and all different factors. But what happened was I started to have panic attacks about death, to the point where I felt like I was having an outer body experience and did not understand. And it felt like I remember saying to my parents, I think I need to go to an institution. And to them, that was probably heartbreaking, but that was my point of like, this is not how I want to live my life. It can't control me anymore like this. And
Mm.
so I'm really glad that you're saying that, if we can share that with everybody, don't try not to let it get to that point. So you don't have to necessarily be going through something or have diagnosed a mental health issue or gone through something traumatic. You can take care of yourself before then. So with that said, Carlee, do you have certain tools? I know you mentioned the creative stress reduction. Maybe we can get into that a little bit more, but tools that you always go to and you make sure that you keep throughout your daily life?
Yeah, you know what? I wouldn't even go as far as saying tools. Like I think the first piece is just awareness. Like I go out, I'm a professional speaker. I'm speaking out with the public constantly, and I'm constantly hearing people actually don't even know when they're experiencing stress. They have no idea. Like just like you were saying, you had no idea that there was a bigger issue. You were just going through your life. And I think like at the end of the day, the first step is just awareness. So like just acknowledging what stress is, I think is a really great place to start, like a good foundation. So, what is stress? My personal favorite definition is a condition or feeling experienced when we perceive that the demands exceed our social and personal resources, right? So at the end of the day, stress comes when we feel like we can't handle whatever is coming our way. And then taking it a step further and saying, okay, well, first of all, stress comes up when we feel like we can't handle it. But how is it coming up for me? Because a lot of times when we think of stress, we think immediately of like anxiety or shutting down or even like the depressive symptoms. But we have to get to a place where we're really acknowledging that emotion, especially stress, shows up in different ways, like extremely different ways in so many different people. Like it can be irritability. I think this is probably the most common one. When we think to ourselves, we just write it off like, oh, I'm just grouchy today, or oh, it's just hormones. And it may be hormones, but it also might be stress. And going into, okay, stress can cause depression, stress can cause anxiety, stress can cause social withdrawal, it can cause all sorts of unhealthy coping mechanisms. And instead of saying, like, for instance, like eating is something that I see a lot. Instead of saying to ourselves, oh, I just like to eat, I'm a foodie, or oh, I need to go on a diet, maybe we should get to the root and figure out, oh, actually, I'm stressed. Like this is just how it's manifesting in my life. And I need, like, I don't have the motivation maybe to stop eating, or I don't have the motivation to, whatever. But I now have the awareness. Now that I have the awareness, I might be able to change some things.
And you mentioned about feeling unmotivated. So what are some common effects that you see within our mentality, within our physical body? How can we see stress or recognize it?
Yeah. So, I mean, we can go back to the emotional side of things like irritability, anxiety, it can lead to depression, all of that. But then we have more physical symptoms, which is, um, which I like to say they're very individualized. We could go down the rabbit hole, which we've all heard, like stress can cause, heart attacks and strokes and digestive issues and all of that. But at the end of the day, if we want to be really clear on how it shows up for us, there's an exercise. I always laugh when I recommend it because it's so untraditional and some people will drop their jaws when I recommend it. But just to go to a mirror in your home and look yourself dead in the eyes and say something about yourself that you're sensitive about. So, whether, let's say, you have financial issues that you're really sensitive about, and going into that mirror, looking yourself dead in the eyes and maybe saying, you don't know what you're doing with your finances. You're broke. Like, are you kidding me? Like, saying something like that. And just noticing how stress shows up in your body in that moment. Do you feel it in your throat? Do you feel it in your gut? Sometimes we feel it in our eyes, like the welling up, like we could cry. And just to take note of that, like just to know, oh, maybe I'm not feeling the emotional side of things, but I'm feeling it in my throat or in my gut or whatever. So I know when I feel that feeling that I'm experiencing stress right now and it's time to take action so that it doesn't turn into a full-blown mental breakdown.
That's such an interesting exercise because I've heard the opposite, and you may have as well, as looking in the mirror and saying, something positive like I am beautiful, or I am, smart. And I've tried that before, and that's actually very hard. And I always would kind of be like, oh, whatever, yeah. But doing that and seeing your own reflection is kind of difficult. So I imagine that um, doing this in the mirror as well. Do you have any tips to, is it just like just do it, just try it and see what happens?
Yeah, I would say like take more like of an experimental or scientific approach to it. Like go to the mirror and be like, well, let's see how this goes. Let's see what comes up. And this is just an experiment. But what I would say is that I always put a little asterisk on this exercise. This is not an exercise to, mentally whip yourself. This is not an exercise to beat yourself up. This is an exercise just to see how your body holds stress, because most of us really suppress, like 100%, we suppress our emotions, and our bodies now just like trying to tell us something. But also, I would say, which Daniela I think is a good point, oftentimes when I'm recommending this to clients, is I will recommend the first piece of the exercise, which is to say something you're sensitive about and not be so nice about it, and then feel or notice the results. And then if you need the palate cleanser, do the palate cleanser and say something great about yourself relating to that same sensitivity, right? So if it were finances, we might say like, I am wealthy, like I'm amazing at managing money and my money works for me and not the other way around. And so see how that shows up in your body. Because we get to the point in our lives, we're so busy that we just don't even pay attention to our emotions anymore. So even knowing how good emotions feel in our body too can be really powerful.
If it's okay with you, I want to circle back to when you mentioned about what happened to you in your childhood and growing up and facing that PTSD, post traumatic stress. That's something that I feel through Still Standing Together has not been touched on as much as I would like to help those with it. You also kind of mentioned about feeling stuck. I feel like the feeling stuck, quote unquote, is more common to hear, but how does that tie in with what you've recovered from through the PTSD you faced?
So I think that when you are going through something really, really difficult and you are so, so desperate to do anything to change your circumstance, to change the way you're feeling, and you just don't know what to do, I think that is what stuck is. Like we hear get unstuck all the time. It's like a marketing, tool these days. But when you go to, like, for me, like I went to therapy as a kid, I went to yoga, I exercised, I grew up Christian, I went to church, you know I did all of these things and then some to try to handle it, and it wasn't working, and that was what stuck meant for me. And going I think the work that I do is really about saying you could have explored these five, and by the way, it's about five mainstream approaches that we offer as a society for managing stress. So you can go and try, mainstream approach after mainstream approach and after mainstream approach, and it's not going to work. And I mean, that's what stuck is. But then working with me, it's really about, okay, you've tried those things and that's cool and they don't work for you. And you know what? That's even cooler because now you know what doesn't work, right? Thomas Edison and the light bulb, we've all heard it. He found 1,000 ways or 100 ways how to not make a light bulb, and we can celebrate that. But we also have to know that there's infinite possibilities for managing our stress and preventing it from getting to that point of full-blown panic attacks and to where it becomes an actual mental health issue.
On a lighter note, it reminds me for the listeners, if anyone's aware of math today, how they do it, and how we've learned it in the past. I can't tell you how many times I've sat with my nephews and they have this one way to do the math problem, and I explain to them another way and they're like, that's not how you do it. And they're stuck on this one way and I'm stuck on my way. So I really love that your work through stress management, Carlee, is a way to open people's eyes that there is still hope if one way or if a few ways aren't working for that individual.
Yeah, and you know what? It's funny. I This is kind of a lighter note. I was just working with a client today. One of his main stressors are his finances. He wants to be in a place, he wants to be further along than he is. And it's so funny. He said to me, Carlee, I've already gotten my expenses as low as they can go. Like, I just can't possibly get them lower. I don't know what to do. I guess I just need to make more money, but I am waiting on this job interview and blah, blah. And then he spiraled.
Hmm.
And I was like, well, hold up, hold up, hold up. Let's just go back and explore your expenses here for a second. Just humor me. I know you already got them down as low as possible. And we go through them all. And we end up going to his grocery budget and his dining out budget. And he's a single male, lives alone, nobody else. I'm telling you, that budget, there was a lot of money budgeted towards those two things. I was like, are you feeding a family of 4? Um, but he liked his lifestyle a very specific way. And when we looked at it, it was a creative approach when we had to look at it. I was like, well, how can you get your dining out budget? How can you get your eating out budget down? He was like, well, I don't know. Like when I go out, it's this, this, and this, and then it's just clockwork. It happens. And I was like, does this really bring you joy? And he's like, no. I was like, okay, are you willing to give up the mimosas or the alcohol when you go out once a month? He's like, not really. It's kind of fun. And I was like, that's fine. Okay, what can we get rid of? And so we found a creative solution, which most people wouldn't. If you worked with a financial advisor, they probably wouldn't get there, which was, okay, well, if you're not willing to give up the mimosas, are you willing to give up a little bit of food? Eat before you go out. So you order an appetizer instead of a main entree, right? Like those are and that saves him what, like $10 every meal. But I mean, that's just a small example of getting creative.
It's a really great example because my next question to you was, when they put this to work with you, this whole creative stress reduction approach, it answered my question completely, which was going to be, what results have you seen? What can people look forward to when they sit and talk to somebody who is a mentor such as yourself? And that's a great example. It's moving the pieces around to again find what works for you. And I love how you say it, there is no one size fits all on how people do things to help manage their stress.
Yeah. And you can come to a conversation with me and feel like you've tried everything. Just like my client came to me today, and it was just a small, simple example of like, I already got my expenses low. And I'm like, but let's look at it a different way, because it's still causing you stress, and it's becoming, if we're not careful, it can become a chronic stressor. And so, but it doesn't have to be finances, right? It can be any stressor, whether it's, job pressure or relationships or our health. Like, is there a different approach to not only relieve stress, but to get to the root of it, right? Like, I'm not like here sitting here like a spa, right? Like spas help us relax, but we can go into a spa with money problems and leave the spa with money problems. Like, my job as your coach would be to make sure that we're also not only helping you relax and get to a state of calm, but to get to the root of your stress so that it doesn't become chronic and we don't end up in that place where we're talking heart attacks, strokes, and things like that for no reason, right?
I am so glad you mentioned that, because that was a big conversation at this work group and workshop. Is you brought up many times about getting to the root of it. So what are some ways, or maybe just one way, that you would suggest to our listeners for them to start on their own right now at getting to the root of it? And I know you mentioned about going to the spa and it doesn't actually fix the money issue, which is a great example because it makes sense. But what do you want to put out there to help people get started on getting to the root of stress in their lives?
Yeah, I would start by just looking at what is causing most Americans to stress, and I'm going to start there because I know those statistics. So, for depending on your gender, job pressure or money are the number one stressors in the United States. If you're a woman, money is number one, and then job pressure. If you're a man, it's job pressure and then money. And then we go into health concerns like chronic health issues like cancer. Or chronic disease, things like that, relationships. And now I'm going to go a little out of order. Things like media overload, poor nutrition, all of that. I mean, those are the top stressors in the US. And if you want to start there, if you can say, okay, yeah, money is concerning me. If I'm worrying about it more than once a week, I'm worrying about it every day, that's definitely a trigger that I need to get to the root of. Really starting there, and just even if you want to journal and spend some time being like, what have I been worrying about lately? What have I not been able to let go of when I'm riding the train or commuting to work or when I'm trying to go to sleep at night? What is going through my brain? Because those are my triggers. Those are my stressors that I need to get to the root of. And so, for instance, I was just talking to a client who had experienced trauma in former relationships, and now she's in a great relationship, and so she worries constantly about her new partner. And so we realize, okay, that is a trigger for you. And that means we need to get to the root of it. So what is it that we need to explore? Well, we get to the root and we find out that she was in a verbally abusive relationship, borderline physically abusive relationship. I guarantee you she has PTSD. Her next move to get to the root of her stress is to say, I need to go see a professional who specializes in domestic violence and unpack all of that trauma that she had never unpacked so that she can work in a healthy relationship. But then we have, the other side of the spectrum for your listeners who, for those of you who are listening at home that are like, okay, maybe your relationship, like maybe my relationship is the biggest thing that's stressing me out. Well, what about it is stressing you out? And really thinking about what that specific thing is, and is there something that we can change? One of my favorite exercises that I usually do it when I'm getting really, really overwhelmed is just to sit down and write about all of the things I'm worried about. So let's say if you're an entrepreneur, you write down, I need $500 by next week. I don't know where I'm going to get all these clients. I'm worried about taking time off. All of those worries you can write down, list them all of them. And it doesn't have to be in your professional life. It can be anywhere. And then go back to those worries and turn those worries or stressors into questions. So instead of, I don't know where I'm going to get $500, it's how can I get $500? Right? And so shifting all of those worries into questions that where you're able to take action and you are more in control and you are empowering yourself. That's the difference between stress and not, right? If we go back to the definition of stress, stress is when we feel like we can't handle whatever we're up against. So if we start to answer those questions, we start to feel like we can handle it and we're able to step out of stress and into a more confident version of ourselves.
That's great advice because it gives people a place to start, which I feel is the hardest part.
Yeah, getting started is always easier said than done.
Exactly. So I hope our listeners really, listen again and take your advice on that, on everything you just mentioned, because the whole time I just kept thinking, wow, what a great place to start when you feel overwhelmed.
Hi, listeners. This is Daniela. I just wanted to jump in to give you a break to pull out your journal and reflect on some of the things that Carlee has mentioned. Maybe try some of the practices that she talks about, and then continue to listen to the remainder of episode 17.
Now, you mentioned about explaining stress, so I do want to get even dirtier and down deeper into this, like we mentioned in the beginning. So, a few things on that. So, you have a formula that you shared on our social media about stress. Can you share that with our listeners and go a little deeper into that?
So you're talking about the suffering equals pain times resistance.
Yes.
Yeah. So this is a formula that I heard from Kristen Neff, and I actually don't think that she is the originator of this formula, but it's an incredible formula. So suffering equals pain times resistance. So when we get triggered, when we have a worry, when we experience a stressor, that is pain, right? We experience mental, emotional pain in our minds the exact same way we experience physical pain, right? Our minds, our bodies, our brains don't actually know the difference between the two. And so when we experience a trigger, that is the pain. But the more we resist it, the more suffering we create. So resistance, what does that look like? Well, it could look like just suppressing it. It could look like, Daniela, you said when you were younger, you went out and you partied, and that could be resistance, like not wanting to deal with it. Resistance could mean saying, I don't have time for you right now. I got to make it through this week. I got too much on my to-do list. Or resistance could look like judging ourselves and saying like, I shouldn't be feeling this way. I have the perfect life, and why am I feeling this way? But the more we resist that pain, that experience, the more suffering we create. So at the end of the day, our goal is really to experience, because stress isn't going to go anywhere. Life still throws us curveballs, right? Experience that trigger and say, I'm going to fully experience it and not resist it so that I don't create more suffering. So, how do we do that? Well, we can go back to that exercise that I just mentioned a few minutes earlier, where we say, okay, I experienced this trigger. This trigger is I don't have $500 or whatever it is. And instead of saying, going into the spiral, which is usually our habitual response, which is, oh my goodness, I don't have $500. How am I going to do this? What are my parents going to think? How am I going to make rent? Da, 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 da. Into, okay, I experienced the trigger. I don't have $500. How am I going to get $500? Pause, answer. And I think that's the difference too. And not only that, just letting yourself feel the pain, letting yourself feel the discomfort, because oftentimes if we don't, it ends up turning into, a blow up or a breakdown. And that at the end of the day does create more suffering.
So what's amazing about what you just shared and what you do, Carlee, that I think is just great, especially going back to what you mentioned in the beginning of this podcast of what you experienced, is that you also said it was hard to find that social support. So what's amazing is that you are creating this. I hope you realize that you are creating that support to others so that they don't feel alone. So now, yeah, so thank you, because I think it's amazing for what you're doing for the community and for throughout all of the, media and materials you put out and the connections that you make and the speaking that you do and the individualized work you do, that you are creating that support system. So now, how did you build that support system? How do you suggest to people to build that support system? Is it working with a mentor to start with? Is it going to different events? What do you suggest for those who are looking to build more of a support system?
Yeah, it's funny. I actually have a name for this, which is called the Stress Less Advisory Board. Everyone should have one, and I actually talk about this in my online course that I'm launching in January, late January. But and how to do all of this. But I think everyone should have a diverse stress less advisory board. So what does that mean? Well, we have the people in our family, our blood, our, those people who have always supported us, that we choose, right? Like these are the healthy people for us we can have on our advisory board. We have our friends, and these are people that we look up to. These are not people that are holding us down, keeping us in gossip, helping us drink the night away, but really like the friend that you truly respect and that supports you. And you can go dating around for friends as well, but really, and then taking it beyond that, those are the two that we hear about a lot, but taking it beyond that and saying, okay, what about my colleagues? Is there someone that works in my field that will understand what I'm going through in my professional life, that I can buzz up and say, hey, oh my goodness, I'm going through this, and have them be there to support you? I think having, your work wife or your work husband is a game changer. And then we go into, more formal relationships, somebody that can be an accountability partner, somebody that's going to hold you to taking care of yourself, to implementing creative stress reduction, to doing that exercise where we write out our worries and turn them into questions and empower ourselves. Having someone do that. And then we go into coaches, right? Finding the right coach, and then therapists as well. So your advisory board, it can fluctuate depending on where you're at in your life and what you're doing. But at the very least, what I recommend for everyone is to have one member of your family, one really good friend, an accountability partner, a coach, and a therapist minimum, right? It takes a village to get into a healthy state of mind. It takes a village to stay there. And then, if you're an entrepreneur, or if you're an entrepreneur, I would say, you have a few more people to add to that list, right? You've got your accountant, you've got your lawyer, you've got, all of that too. But making sure that you have your village in place, and so that you can take care of yourself.
I am all smiles and nodding over here on my end because it's such a great idea and it makes sense. And it's funny you mentioned that if you're an entrepreneur, it can also be like an accountant or a lawyer, because I can't tell you how many times I've cried to my accountant.
Yeah. Oh
So
my God.
it's true, and it's great that you're, again, it comes back to what you said earlier about that awareness. So now it's a whole new perspective of awareness that you're sharing, which I love, because now it's awareness of like people that you maybe didn't think you had on your side. You really can lean on them for support.
Hmm. And it's important to pick those people out when you're in a good headspace. Now, if you're listening to this and you're like, "Oh my goodness, I need help and I need it yesterday," you can still pick those people out. But when you're in a good headspace, to pick those out, because that way you know when you are going through it, you can go to that piece of paper, you can go to that document on your computer and you can say, "Who can I reach out to? Who's here to support me?" Because our subconscious minds are crazy. They'll tell us all sorts of crazy stories like no one's there for us and no one loves us. It's total bull crap. If we can go back to that and say, no, this person I trust and I know, because I wrote this when I was in a good state of mind, when I knew what I needed to do to take care of myself. Like that's going to be a game changer too.
It's a great perspective. Now, we are getting close to the end, sadly, of the podcast episode. And it is a coincidence that you mentioned about having those people that you trust, because for me, I would suggest you to anybody in a second. So if you could share with everyone how they can get in touch with you and reach out, all of that, so that they can begin to know that they have a trusted source through you.
Yeah, and I appreciate the vote of confidence for me. But yeah, you can find me, on a more casual note on social media at the Stress Less Co. That's on Insta and Facebook. But if you're looking to dig deeper, maybe you do feel stuck. Maybe you feel like you've tried everything, or you want somebody to be able to tell you how it is, but also hold you in love to help you get through this time of your life. I would really encourage you to go to stresslessco.com/apply and apply for a complimentary stress less clarity session. It's a 30-minute phone call where we just get to the root of your stress and create an action plan for you to step out of it. It's 100% customized to you and your life. So stresslessco.com/apply. And then, of course, on social media at the Stress Less Co.
Yes, and I hope they listen to your podcast and show, because you have incredible interviews on there. So definitely check that out, everybody, too. So for our listeners, you have shared so much great advice. And for lack of a better word, I say great, but what I really want to say is that unconventional approach. These are things that you've shared, Carlee, that I feel like we have not shared yet through our podcast. So I'm so grateful to you for that.
Thank you.
And now, if you could, in my tradition with still standing together, if you could help leave our listeners with either an affirmation or a thought so that they can continue on past this episode with some sort of self talk or positive peace in their mind.
Yeah, I have to tell you, when you mentioned affirmation to me before the show, I was like, I immediately knew what affirmation I was going to choose. This affirmation has helped pull me out of some serious anxiety, serious stress, and has helped me just re empower myself over and over and over again. Um, and so here's how it goes. It's super difficult. No, I'm totally kidding. So here's how it goes. It's actually really simple. I choose calm. That's it. I choose calm. And I choose calm can mean I'm going to reach out to my village and get support, or I'm going to apply for a session with Carlee, or I'm going to talk to Daniela. I'm going to go to one of the workshops. It can mean anything, but choosing calm at the end of the day is the most empowering thing that we can do.